Have you ever been stressed, worried, anxious, confused? Maybe all of the above. Are you worried about your next paycheck or your diet? What about your grades? Will they be good enough to get you into that college? Are the deadlines at work piling up? While your marriage is falling apart? Do you feel like a bill is due every day? And with all these repairs, you can never get ahead? Does it seem like the whole world is closing in around you? How can you win the war against worry when you just feel overwhelmed?
Okay, quick survey, everybody. How many of you were not overwhelmed until that video? Anybody else? We will have massage therapists on your way out today to help relieve some of that stress. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to church. My name is Jason. I'm really excited that you're here today. We're kicking off a brand new series that I'm super excited about called Overwhelmed. And just full transparency, this is funny how life tends to work for me. Whatever I'm teaching on, I feel like I experience. Like whatever I'm walking through and teaching, it's like I'm going to experience it in my own life. And I was feeling really good this week. As we were starting today, I was like, I'm not overwhelmed by anything. My life's under control. And then during worship here in Lakeland, I get a phone call from Pastor Judd and Brandon, and he's like, the power keeps going out at church here. The video message may not work today. And I'm like, oh, instantly I felt that sense in my soul. So anyways, next week, I'm going to start a new series on being very rich from God, where God just gives you millions of dollars, because that's what I seem to experience. Anyways, whatever. Hey, we are starting this new series called Overwhelmed. On Thursday, just for kicks, I put up on Facebook a post and I just said, hey, I'm working on a new message series. What overwhelms you? And if I'm honest, the responses overwhelmed me. It was unbelievable, the things that people go through. Here is a boiled down list. In like an hour, it was 140 comments on this. Here's just a quick sense. Debt overwhelms us. Sickness overwhelms us. Death. The news. I mean, this one gets me at times. I just want to turn it off because of how overwhelming it can feel. Comparison is the enemy. It's the killer of joy in your life. Meetings, abandonment, worry, these things, there's more. Our stuff, our possessions have a tendency of overwhelming us. Kids and marriage, that makes sense. Loss overwhelms us. Work can be overwhelming at times. Regret can be undeniably overwhelming in seasons. Fear can be overwhelming in time and time management and how we handle the limited time that we have. All of those things can be overwhelming. And there were so many responses. In fact, go to my Facebook page and just read some of the things that people said that overwhelms them. And it's clear that all of us, we deal with it. And two things stood out to me in this. The first thing, as I read through all of these comments, was this. Number one, life is hard. It just is. Our life, the day in, day out grind of life is just challenging. And I wish there were Bible verses that promise it would be easy. I wish there were Bible verses that would make it less difficult and less overwhelming at times, but there's not. The second thing I realized from this, if we're just honest, we're some jacked up people. Like we some jacked up peeps. We just are. Like we walk through some really difficult, really challenging days in our life. And for the next 4 weeks, we just want to talk about how do we cope with all of this. Now, I found this verse that really feels like a theme. It feels like an umbrella that will kind of rest over this whole message series. This is David, and I want you to pay attention to David's words. David says in Psalm 61 from the New King James, kicking it old school, he says, hear my cry, O God. And listen to the language, cry. This is a sense of urgency. Hear my cry, O God. Attend to my prayer. And he goes on to say this, from the ends of the earth, I will cry to you. He's like, no matter how far it takes, no matter what it costs, I will cry to you. And then he says, when my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. Now leave this here for a second. I'm not going to dissect this verse this week, but this essentially means this. The Hebrew word that he uses here for the word overwhelmed implies that feeling. Like if you've ever been trapped under the water for just a second too long. That sense of like, I've got to get back to air. That sense of trying to stand up when the waves are just completely knocking you over. That sense of being pushed over by the water. That's the sense that he gives of the internal state of our souls. He's like, when my life and my heart is overwhelmed, when the inside part of me feels like it can't get a gasp of fresh air, when that's happening, then he says, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. Essentially, this is beautiful, poetic, metaphorical language that simply says, bring my perspective to a place higher than my problems. You see, what so many of us tend to do in life is we tend to magnify our problems. Don't we? I've got all the stress, all the bills, all the work, all the things to do, all the kids to run to all their various soccer and piano and ballet and all the things. I've got so many things, and my boss is a jerk, and life is just so full. Life is so overwhelming. And we tend to make all of our problems really big, and what that does is it tends to make God really small. And what David is saying is this. He goes, lead me to a rock, lead me to a higher place of perspective where I see it through your lens, which makes you big and you great, God, and it makes my insufficiencies, and it makes my struggles and my challenges feel small in comparison. Now, last week, we completed a 4-week series that I love called 4 Things I Wish You Knew About God. And in that series, we got very theological, very, very deep. But for these 4 weeks, I want to get unbelievably helpful, unbelievably practical. We're going to talk about issues like worry and stress, comparison, expectations, and dealing with fear. And today, though, I want to talk to you about the one that I probably struggle with the most, if I'm just honest. I want to talk to you about how we handle our time. Now, here's what you need to know about me. I am what people call an early adopter when it comes to technology. Anytime something new comes out, I want to have the newest and the best. I want to be the first one to try it. I'm the person who would wait in line for iPhones back in the day when people did this. Like, I love having new technology. And the promise of all technology is that it's going to make our life better and more efficient and faster and smarter. And so I've got all kinds of cool tech gadgets. I've got an iPhone, I've got an Apple Watch, and these things keep me connected to the world that's happening around me. That's wonderful. My wife and I, we started doing things at our house to make our home a smart home. I can talk, I can say, hey Alexa, do this, and I can tell Alexa to turn on the light, and a light turns on in my house. I can tell Alexa to change the temperature in my house, and my temperature changes. It's like I'm living with the Jetsons, you know what I'm saying? Like, it is so much fun. But maybe the single greatest piece of technology that I own is something that I bought for my wife this last Christmas. Now, this thing changed the whole game for me, and it changed the whole game for Liz. It's called a Roomba. Have you ever seen one of these? This is a robot vacuum cleaner. When we got this, my wife was like, oh, that's cool. But then we plugged it in, and when we turned it on, she looked more romantically at that than she did to me on our honeymoon, people. It's unbelievable. She stared at this thing, and I'm over there serving, looks at her like, girl, you got to just back up on this. Like, that's what's happening. And she loves this thing. She loves this technology. Honestly, maybe like a little tiny bit more than me. Just maybe it's serious how much she loves this thing. She named it DJ Roomba. She just loves it. It's just so much fun for her. Now, the promise of all technology is that all technology will set us free. The promise of technology is that it'll deliver us from all the busyness, of all the stress. It'll less complicate our minds. Check this out. In the 1960s, a famous news reporter named Walter Cronkite predicted this. This is in the 1960s. Walter Cronkite said, technology is opening a new world of leisure time. Oh, this is so great. One government report projects that by the year 2000, the United States will have a 30-hour work week and a month-long vacations as the rule. Now, out of curiosity, how many of you just loved your month-long vacation? Yeah? And are you surviving the 30-hour work week? Anybody just loving that? No, the truth is, that's not the reality for any of us. Has technology made us more efficient? Yeah, it sure has. Has technology made us more organized? Hopefully, yeah, it sure has. But we consumed the margin. In the 1980s, an amazing piece of technology that you totally take for granted came out, called the anti-lock brakes. Before this came out nationally and around the world, this wasn't really a thing. So drivers had to be a lot more careful because the anti-lock brakes, they allow us to stop way faster than without having anti-lock brakes. And so in Munich, Germany, in the early 1980s, these researchers who were working on the anti-lock brakes study. Now, the whole idea with the study was they put anti-lock brakes on about a third of the cars in a certain fleet. 2/3 didn't have anti-lock brakes. And for 3 years, they studied and followed along with these cars. And what they were shocked to find was that at the end of 3 years, the 1/3 of the vehicles with anti-lock brakes, they had just as many accidents as those who didn't have the anti-lock brakes. And this baffled their mind. Why would this happen? Because those anti-lock brakes should make it safer, should cause us to stop faster. Why did it not reduce the number of accidents in any way? So when they dug into the research, they found this. They found that once the people had that sense of security from the anti-lock brakes, once they understood that it would cause them to stop faster, they took the margin that they had, this extra room, and they consumed it. They started driving even closer to the other cars. A couple weeks ago, my wife and I were on I-4. I was driving, she was in the passenger seat, and we were in pretty thick traffic. We weren't stopped yet, but it was very, very thick. And we see in the lane next to us, literally one car ahead of us, this guy, I can see him coming up and he's swerving in and out. I mean, so fast and so dangerous. And literally one car over, one car ahead of us, he swipes this lady's car, just hits her and just jumps ahead and keeps going. And it was just this moment of, we have no margin at all in our life. Now, the best way I can describe this idea of margin is simply this. If you have your message notes, margin is the space that exists between our load and our limits. It's the space that exists between our load and our limits. This is showing up a few minutes early to an event so you don't feel the pressure of being late. This is budgeting yourself so that at the end of the month, there's more money than there is month. Many of us are really good at having more month than we are at having money. Margin is creating space for us to breathe and to relax and to withdraw from all of the busyness that surrounds all of us. For years before we started our church, I was a graphic designer, and margin is the space you leave around some sort of a graphic. This graphic is driving me crazy because there is no margin, and yet this graphic perfectly represents how so many of us live our lives. Now, the Bible has a lot to say about this. The Bible has a lot to teach us about how we can operate as people when it comes to our time as people of margin. In the book of Psalm, David says this, and this is one of the most beautiful verses, it's so poetic. He says, teach us to number our days. God, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. I would love to be known as a person who has a heart full of wisdom. And how do we do this? By numbering our days. Here's the problem with this verse, is I don't know how many days that I have left. If you have sat in a funeral service for someone you love recently, you have that moment where you start to count the things that count. You start to pay attention to the things in your life that actually matter. The reason this verse is challenging for me is if I knew how many days I had left, as morbid as that sound, I would structure my life accordingly. If someone told me you've got 50 years left, it would change the way that I work in this season. It would change the way that I save in this season. If someone told me that I have 30 days to live, I would quit everything and I would spend every waking moment doing the things I love with the people that I love. The problem is I don't know how many days that I have, and you don't know how many days that you have. So how do we effectively number our days? How do we create margin in our life so that we can experience God and experience the fullness of life the way Jesus intended for us? Now, to do this, I want to go to the perfect example, and I want to look at 3 different sections of Scripture where we encounter Jesus having this ability to master this moment. Jesus, we know this. He lived about 30 years before he started his public ministry. And we know from reading the Bible that Jesus had 3 years of public ministry between him getting baptized by John the Baptist and him being crucified and dying on the cross, about 3 years. So Jesus knows how long he's got. He knows the whole point of his life and his very existence on earth is to die for the sins of humanity, but he's got 3 years. Now, if you're anything like me, if I found out that I had 3 years as Jesus to change the world, to heal a bunch of people, to teach about God, you better believe I would pack my calendar as full as I could. You ever pay attention to the end of like a presidential election, the last 2-3 weeks? They're making up to 15 or 20 stops a day. If I'm Jesus in that season and I've got 3 years to live, I'm packing my calendar, I'm having a PR agent, I'm having 2 or 3 personal assistants, I'm getting a helicopter, they don't have helicopters, but I'm getting one because I'm Jesus. Like I'm doing whatever I need to do to get wherever I need to go, to do as much as I possibly can. But when you look at Jesus, 45 times, just in the 4 books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that we have about his life, 45 times he withdraws. 45 different times he taps the brakes so that he can step back from all of his busyness and rest and pray and reflect. This is what Jesus does. Jesus also has this unique thing that he does, where sometimes you're reading about him, and he'll be on his way to a place, and he'll just divert his whole trip. Like, again, if I'm Jesus, I'm on a schedule. If I'm Jesus, I've got a calendar of events and things to do. And yet Jesus has this flexibility in his schedule to divert from his course to go heal someone or to teach about God in a different kind of way. This is Jesus. And in Mark chapter 1, we kind of pick up in the book of Mark where Jesus is kicking off his public ministry. He's just been baptized by John the Baptist. And in Mark chapter 1, verse 35, it says this about Jesus. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, and some of you don't know this, there are hours of the day before you get up when it is still dark. Jesus, he got up, left the house, and went to where? A solitary place where he prayed. He had all the things to do, but before he tried to tackle all of those things, he left all of the busyness and he found a place of solitude to pray. Verse 37, Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you. Do you know who you are? Do you know how important you are? Do you realize our to-do list is a mile long today? Do you understand this?" And Jesus replied, cool, right. Let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages. I can preach there also. This is why I have come. It's like Jesus, he lives with margin. He gets up extra early so that he can spend time praying. I mean, what an amazing model for us. So many of us say things like, I just don't have any time. There's not enough time to accomplish my things. Well, compare your life and the importance of what you do to Jesus. Jesus, he creates space in his schedule so he can get up early to spend time with God, his Father. He spends time in prayer, and then he says something crazy. He's like, yeah, I know I've got a to-do list, but there's something else that matters. I know I've got things to accomplish today, but there's something else that's even better. Let me say it to you like this. There is a significant difference between you doing things that are good and you doing the things that are best. There's a significant difference between you doing the things in your life that are good and you doing the things that are the best. My guess about so many of us is that we're not doing things that are bad. We're not out robbing banks and shooting people up, and we're not doing those things. We're doing good things, but good has this way of crowding out the ability to do the best. And my challenge for you is, so many of us live chasing the immediate and all the things that have to get done right this second, that we miss out on the ultimate, and Jesus is the example that we can experience the best if we'll lean in and listen. So the first thing we said was this: Jesus was intentional with his choices. That matters so much. If you ever fill in the blank notes, Jesus was intentional with his choices. The second thing that we need to understand about Jesus is that he was also intentional to withdraw. Jesus was intentional to withdraw. Now, I said it a moment ago, 45 different times. And this isn't his whole life. It's certainly not his whole ministry. Think about 3 whole years of Jesus' ministry is condensed down to just a couple hundred pages at the most. I mean, this is Jesus' life, and we only get a little snapshot, a little snippet of it. And yet, in that little snippet, we see 45 times that he chooses to withdraw and pray. Now, in Mark chapter 6, there's this fascinating story. Mark chapter 6 is really this amazing book. If you read through the Bible, start in the book of Mark. If you're new to the Bible, start in the book of Mark, because it's all about Jesus and all about his ministry. Mark 6 is one of those highlight chapters of the Bible for me. And we're going to read 2 different sections of passages that talk about how Jesus withdrew from everything and all the busyness. But in the middle is one of the most amazing miracles. Mark chapter 6, we'll start with verse 30. It says, the apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all that they had done and taught. So they're giving Jesus kind of a quick status update. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, Jesus says to them, so they're so busy, they don't even make time for food, which that is too busy, everybody. And it goes on, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest, Jesus says. Jesus is all about rest. Get some rest. And then he goes on. So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. They've just experienced some amazing moments. They've just experienced some amazing miracles. And Jesus says, listen, I know the crowds want us. I know there's people who want to be near us and talk to us and experience the miracles. I get all of those things. But we have to lead from a place of rest. We have to lead from a place of our soul being healthy. And so many of us, and I'm just going to pick on you for a second, so many of you lead from such an unhealthy place of rest. I am the first one to admit how guilty I am of this. I don't talk about this much, but I pastor a church that's a growing church, and it's a lot of fun, but we're busy, and we deal with some really messed up, hurting, broken situations and people. And so that's one. And then I have this second company that I run that's very, very busy. And for a season in my life, 5 or 6 years ago, I didn't have any employees working with me. And so in that season of my life, it was just a little fun startup, self-employed project. It wasn't a business yet. And in that season, there were days that I would work, and I would work as hard as I could throughout the day for the church. Then I'd go home and have dinner with my family. About 6:30 or 7 o'clock, I would start working, and I would work until 11 or 12 or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, 6 nights a week. On Saturday night, I would go to bed early because I would get to preach the next morning. But the other 6 nights of the week, I would stay up until almost morning. I got myself so sick in this season, so sick physically, emotionally, spiritually. I look back at messages that I preached in that season, and my face looks puffy. I was sick, went to the doctor. I did, in my opinion, irreparable harm to my body by working. People talk, I'm so busy. I was clocking 100 to 120-hour work weeks every single week. I was sick and on the verge of burnout. And Jesus, if you follow his model, he's like, you got to back up from this. You can't lead from a place of full depletion. You have to lead from a place of rest. So we fast forward a few verses in Mark chapter 6 again, verse 45. It says this. It says, immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, where he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. So what we experience with Jesus is this, is in the midst of all of his busyness, he creates this space and this margin in his life to back up from all of it, to withdraw from things so that he can pray. Let me say it to you like this. Here, this is in your notes. When we withdraw, we recharge. When we withdraw, we recharge. So many of us think that I just have to get everything done, and once I get everything done, then I can finally rest. The problem is you are bought into the illusion of control. You assume in that season of your life that you are in control of your schedule and you are in control of your life. I just want to say this to you. The dreams in your heart, the plan and purpose of God for your life is not in contradiction to withdrawing for the sake of rest and prayer. It's not. In fact, I'll say it to you like this. When we try to accomplish our dreams without praying, we're saying, I'm doing this in my own power. When we try to accomplish our dreams without resting, we're depleting the very power that we're trying to rest on instead of God's. And what would it look like if all of us made this decision that in order to accomplish the dreams in my heart, in order to be the best version of myself, in order to give my wife or my husband and my kids the best version of me, in order to bring the best that I have to my job and to my relationships and to everything, I have to lead from a place of rest. And here's the final point, and it's this, is that in order to do all of this, we have to develop sustainable rhythms. We have to live in rhythm, and here's something I love, is that God models this for us. Genesis chapter 1, God creates the world, and he creates it in 6 days, and as he creates, and he says it's good, and he creates, and he says it's good, and he creates, and he says it's good. He creates over and over and over again, and then on the 7th day, what does God do? God rests. Now, does God need rest? No, he's God. He's all powerful. He can do anything he wants. But as a model for humanity, God takes a breather. God rests. He shuts it down. And God himself models what he asked for us in the book of Exodus, which is that we create an interesting thing in our life, a dynamic called a Sabbath. Now, I was reading for my doctoral program recently, and we did this whole section on Sabbath, and I realized that part of the reason that I have so jacked up my life and my schedule, and part of the reason I have so overwhelmed myself with feeling out of control when it comes to my time, is I've never developed this sustainable rhythm called a Sabbath. Now, what I used to think was that Sabbath meant that I just stopped doing everything, that I literally laid on my couch for 24 hours, Netflix all day. I get a little bell that I ring where someone brings me something to drink and eat. That is not what Sabbath means. Here is the best definition of Sabbath from a book that I read a few weeks ago. This is from Peter Scazzaro. He says, Sabbath is a 24-hour block of time in which we stop work, we enjoy rest, we practice delight, and we contemplate God. 24 hours. It doesn't have to be a whole day. It can be 24 hours. It can start at 6 o'clock one night and go till 6 o'clock the next night. I've been trying as best I possibly can in my own life to start sometime around dinner time on Friday and to go through dinner time on Saturday, because Saturday nights, every single Saturday night, I start working and I work until the message feels ready to be delivered to you. And sometimes that's 10 o'clock and sometimes that's 2 a.m., but I just work at it until it's ready to go. And so for me, I had to find this space in my life where I stopped work, where I'm not available. When in your schedule can no one get a hold of you? When in all of your busyness is your phone turned off? When can you not respond immediately to a text message? When does this happen? Where I enjoy rest. And this is one of the hardest things for me. I've told you the story before, but a few years ago, my wife and I were on an amazing vacation together, and we were at the beach, and there was this time. We'd been 3 days on the trip, 3 full days of being in the city, and my wife, she literally walked around and stood face to face with me, and she grabbed my shoulder, and she goes, "Oh, hi." And I said, "Oh, hi." And I said, "What?" She goes, "You're here." And I said, "So are you. What are you doing? What are you smoking? What are you doing?" And she goes, no, you're finally here. And what she was implying to me was for 3 days, I was physically there, but my mind was somewhere else, unable to enjoy rest, unable to stop. Then he goes on. Can you go back to the definition of Sabbath for me, please? We have to stop stop work, enjoy rest, practice delight. What are the things that fuel you? What are the things that fill your soul? I have learned that on Fridays for me, there's a lot of Fridays when I'm home alone with my little girl, Ella. You know what fills my soul in a way that I never thought would? Playing with Barbies on the floor with my little girl. It's hard to explain. I'd never had sisters. I didn't know anything about Barbies. There is just something about watching Ella take the little Barbie clothes and put them on hangers and put them in Barbie's dream house closet that just does, it's fuel to my soul. And then the final thing is we contemplate God. It's just the day when we take all the busyness and all the things that are swirling around us and we remind ourselves that we are not ultimately in control, but God is. That if we take 24 hours off from all of our work and all the things that we think keep the world spinning, we remind ourselves that God is ultimately the one that keeps the world in motion and not us. So here's my question. How are you resting? Like, if you were really honest about your life and your schedule, are you overwhelmed by your time? Are you overwhelmed by your lack of ability to manage all the things that have to get done? Here's my challenge to you. What would it look like if all of us made this decision to develop a sustainable rhythm of Sabbath in our life? I think, check this out, I think it would change everything for us. Would you, all across this room, in our Brandon campus as well, would you bow your head and close your eyes for just a moment of contemplation? In this moment, I'm going to ask you this question one more time. And I want you to just be honest with yourself. Sometimes telling yourself the truth is the hardest thing. How are you resting? How are you doing at it? Does your time, does your busyness, does your schedule, does it overwhelm you? Like David said in Psalms, like being buffeted by the waves, unable to get a gasp of fresh air? What would it look like if we made this decision that we're going to reorient our schedule God's way? We're going to say, God, I believe that you can make up for me in the time that I'm giving to you. You can make it up to me in other miraculous kinds of ways. I believe it'll be happening for you if you'll just lean in and trust him. Let's pray all together. God, this one is so much easier to talk about than it is to do because we're all busy. We have responsibilities, we have family, we have kids, we have bills to pay, we have work to get done. The to-do list feels like it never ends, and yet so many of us, we've missed the point and we've lived a life without margin. God, for myself, for others maybe who feel the same way, we ask you to help us, to forgive us of crowding the things in our life that matter the most out. God, give us the courage to lean in, to trust you in this way, even when it doesn't make sense. God, I pray that we'll leave today and we'll go home and look at our calendars and we'll write Sabbath. And we'll begin to develop this habit, this rhythm that is sustainable, that will sustain our souls. God, I thank you that when we're overwhelmed, you take us to the rock, like David said, that place of higher perspective over everything, where we make our problems small and we make you so big. So God, in this room, in this moment, we magnify you. We say you are great. We love you. We lean into you.